All right, thanks everyone for joining. Melanie Schlotterbeck. I manage the Southland Power and Nature Coalition. We appreciate you being here, and I am super excited to introduce Krystian Lahage, who's the Public Policy Officer for the Mojave Desert Land Trust. Krystian's a huge desert fan and also a big public policy fan. He and I share a similarity in having a geography background. He has a lot of history in Orange County, whether it's at Huntington Beach or working for the County of Orange, doing political, government affairs content. And then he also worked for Senator Feinstein and moved over to the desert where his true passion lies. And he has extensive experience working under policymakers, but also with them. And so this seems like we're in an age where having a little context on how best to engage with leaders, especially ones where you don't necessarily get along with them, or they may be on opposite sides of where you are, that would be helpful information to have. So I'm going to pass it over to you, and Krystian's going to give 20 minutes or so of a presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions. And by about 11:35, we should be done and heading over to the Southland meeting. So Krystian, floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Melanie, for that wonderful introduction, and so pleased to be with you all today. Thank you so much for joining. And yeah, I'm going to present today about kind of the best practices learned of engaging with elected officials. Part of the work that I do is outreach for Representatives Calvert, Obernolte, and Young Kim. But the lessons and kind of things we go over today can be applied to state, local, federal. We're just going to look at it through the lens of, as Melanie said, someone that we might not agree with as much and need to move to a position of agreement. So let me share real quickly here. Can I get a thumbs up if you can see that all right?
Not yet. There we go. You're good.
Awesome. Okay, great. So we'll go ahead and just dive right in since this is a little bit of an abridged version. But what we're going to talk about today is kind of all of the steps needed to start building your relationship with an elected official, the best way to engage with them, and then working towards a meeting and a long-term term rapport that lets you continue to build off of that relationship and make sure that it's not just a one and done meeting, but that you actually have a meaningful back and forth and start to see things move. So let's first talk about what are our goals when we meet with a legislator. It's easy to kind of just make a meeting and come in with some talking points in hand and think that that's going to be the most effective maneuver. But in reality, we want to think out what of our long-term strategies are. When we meet with these folks, we want to come in with a goal. And so I like to think of other reasons for meeting with legislators, for engaging with them, is to establish a clear record of their actions and stances. Sure, we see what they post online, but how do they actually feel about specific issues, especially our more niche conservation issues, which might not be the sexiest issue to post on your social media, right? It's crucial to actually engage with them to know where they are. Demonstrating the support of key groups. I'm assuming we're all in the conservation space, especially if there are folks that don't necessarily agree with those practices. We need to find ways to bring new voices in that can establish that it's not just a bunch of tree huggers supporting stuff. You have hunters or anglers, recreation, whatever it may be. That's another key pillar. Requesting a specific action or vote. I think that's the most obvious one, and we'll get in a little bit more how to make your asks effective later on down the road. Requesting assistance with federal and state agencies. Your legislators have the ability to either get information or move an action along. So another positive reason to engage. And then building a record of asks to engage in accountability. So you might spend a year engaging with a Congress member, giving them many compelling reasons why not to vote for something like, let's say, the One Big Beautiful Bill, and they might end up still doing it. And it's up to each and every organization or coalition to determine when accountability is in order, but accountability is basically where you specifically would call out that legislator for you met with them, you shared your views, and they still took this negative action. And so accountability can come in a whole lot of ways. That's really up to your coalition strategy, but you can't do accountability if you didn't meet with people in the first place, because that's not good faith effort. You want to actually have come in and given them a chance to take the correct action. So what we're going to do next is I've created our fake legislator here, John Smith, and I'm going to show you kind of how we work backwards with our legislators to come up with a plan before we even ever make that meeting request. So this is going to be mixed up of a bunch of the legislators that are targets across California here. So you might see some familiar things. So we're looking at Mr. John Smith, age 52. He lives in the fictional town of Forest Town, is a moderate Republican, and his district is a mixture of rural and urban deserts, forests, and lakes, and it contains a desert national park. He's a retired Marine Corps veteran who's formerly from LA and moved out to Forest Town to do some real estate business, catering to short-term rentals for tourism. He won his seat in 2020. As we mentioned, lots of public lands in his district, but recreation is his top interest. OHV, fishermen, things like that. Wildfires are extremely common in his district. The bills that he's passed are focused on wildfire prevention, veterans benefits, and small businesses. And he largely stays out of the louder national politics and keeps to those issues. So you don't need to memorize any of this. Again, it's fictional, but I'm going to show you how we kind of break it down into a strategy map. And you can do this with your own local legislator. Normally, when I go through this presentation, we go through a whole thing where we find this information, and I'll share my screen as we go to find my rep. But if you'd like to do this with your rep, you can go to findmyrep.gov or findmyrep.ca for your state representatives. It's very overrated to just go look at the biographies of these individuals, but you can learn a lot, and you'll build on that more when you start actually meeting and engaging. But this is a really crucial way to kind of help you figure out how you're going to engage with this person. You might already know what issue you're talking about, but you want to engage successfully. So I like to break it up. All members of Congress, all members of the state legislature are in committees and caucuses. It's helpful just to find out what they're interested in and where they have some subject matter expertise. So we look at Mr. John Smith. We see he's on the Veteran Affairs Committee, the Small Business Committee, Natural Resources, and Appropriations. Appropriations is the budget. So pretty much any ask you have about funding an agency, you have a nexus to public lands with Representative Smith. Then we want to know who they are as people. And I cannot stress how important this part of it is, and especially for people you don't agree with. Find something find some piece of humanity that you can connect to with them. Look up their biography. You'll find all sorts of information. You see here in other info that in biography, we served in the Marine Corps. Well, do you have someone who also served? Maybe that's a person who can kind of make an initial connection based off of their mutual service. Or in the real estate business, someone that can explain why the value of real estate is intrinsically tied to the preservation of the nature around it. These are the type of ways where we come in more effective, because a lot of these people kind of put up a wall the moment they hear we're from an environmental organization. But if you can come in bringing in this backing of folks who normally don't support our type of work, it makes a huge impact. So then we look at policy, because we want to know also what to avoid, right? We're not fans of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act around here for the most part because of the funding cuts it made. So maybe we don't go in and the first thing we don't bring up is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. We come in with something that we can support or agree on. So really useful to just kind of work out one of these strategy maps and then use it to figure out who do you need to bring into the fold to make whatever meeting or engagement you're going to have more beneficial. And we'll go into that next. So building your group. There's a lot of different ways you can engage with elected leaders, but if we're being honest, the easiest way that you have control over is either requesting a meeting, if your member supports mobile office hours, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. That's another option. Certainly town halls, but one-on-one time of you with the elected or their staff, that comes down to district meetings or DC meetings for the most part. You can certainly go in one-on-one, especially if you have a relationship already, but this is going to be a lot more effective if you can bring in multiple voices. And so we basically use the strategy map we made to figure out who do we want to bring into this conversation. And it doesn't need to be one group. Just to give you some examples here, for the outreach group to Representative Young Kim, we have multiple outreach groups that kind of have different flavors. So one group is working with veterans to get just an all veterans group in front of her because of her support of the veteran cemetery and the long work she did on that in Orange County. So we find these kind of parts in their history and then build a group based on it because it's a group she's already hearing from that she regularly will never deny a meeting with. We have another group that's youth. She's in a campaign year. She certainly needs to hear from young people who are, one of the more engaged in campaigning and things like that. So we have a young people group so that a youth advocates group that can come in and share that perspective. Simultaneously, we're building an accountability group, as I discussed before, because she has started to take more and more right-leaning stances on conservation issues. So we're anticipating a point at which we need to have some more aggressive messaging in the district. The key thing is establishing these groups, right? If you go in as the accountability group, you're done. That's a bridge burned, and it's over. So you need to kind of have a group that can go in and do that that's at arm's length from you. And I think that's a smart practice with any of these groups. Certainly have one of you, a coalition member, lead the group. That's crucial to make sure you're staying on message, making sure you're kind of the keeper of information, and it's someone they can always fall back on. Go to your legislator's strategy map and look at what committees they're on, what was their background, and start finding groups from there. Just start with one. And so we could say with a veterans group, right? I might go to some of the local veteran group organizations and see if there's any connections there. I have a number of folks in town that I know are veterans that own small businesses. So you're even crossing off multiple marks there. And those businesses are related to tours in Joshua Tree. So you can kind of keep extrapolating um, how easy it is to pull someone in. As long as they have some nexus to public lands in their life, that's totally fine. Uh, so the other question is, does anyone you know already have a relationship with the office? If they do, that's probably the person who should make the ask for the meeting to request the meeting. But you also might want to consider having, like, if you're doing a veterans group and you're constantly running into a wall where you're not getting responses for the congressman's office, have one of the veterans send the invitation or have one of the business people send the invitation. These are all different ways that we can kind of get around some of their hesitation to meet with environmental groups while also building out your entire network at the same time. So I mentioned district meetings and office hours. So this is a kind of complicated subject because if we're talking about specifically Republican representatives, most of them have canceled their engagements in their district at the request of leadership. There are exceptions in Southern California, including Jay Obernolte. I apologize, I'm not certain what the entire list of those folks are. But mobile office hours are typically something where your congressperson, either recurring or one-off, sets up a time that his staff or himself or herself are available to hear from constituents. These are always in person. You basically get to come in for 2 to 3 minutes, share your comments. You can even hand in a slip of paper and you go. It's obviously a little less formal, but it's great if you can bring a big group to come and really demonstrate support. In these meetings, you'll typically, it's 15 minutes to an hour required because you can leave after your comments, but sometimes you get hundreds of people when there's big issues like immigration or other things going on. You're typically meeting with the field representative for the local elected, so somewhat entry level staffer, and then the district meetings, which I think applies to much more of us. So any person, any constituent can request a meeting with the congressional office. But what I recommend when you're preparing these group meetings to talk about public lands, 3 to 6 participants. You don't want to overwhelmingly outnumber the congressional staff because it gets kind of just murky and it's hard when you have a bunch of people trying to talk in what is going to ultimately be a 15 to 30-minute meeting. Congress members schedule everything in really tiny blocks. And I would say since COVID, it's 50-50 whether you get in virtual or in person because it kind of varies on what the elected themselves want to do. Oftentimes it's easy for them just to bang out like 4 Zooms back to back rather than take folks into the office. Here you might have a better chance of meeting with higher up staff, including the district director. And then coming from what this looks like from when you're working for Congress, right? Lots of groups come in to meet with you when you're a member of Congress. And if you're meeting in the district, there's often a disconnect between what you say and what gets actually relayed to the member and to their staff in DC. And so one of the things I'll talk about is kind of the persistence of making sure you follow up and kind of keep hammering home your points because they're real. That divide is real. And it's something you always want to keep in the back of your mind of like, oh, we had such a great conversation. Why isn't this reflected in this, right? It's because as these meetings happen, basically at the end of the week, staff summarizes it, they put it in a report and send it over to the elected. But there's not always a personal touch to it of reaching out to the public lands legislative policy person and saying, hey, this thing happened in the district. So we'll talk about that, but I always recommend if you can find the DC office's contact info, just to send a summary of your meeting afterwards to make sure that they're aware it happened, and that it doesn't slip through the cracks. All right, so you made a meeting request. You've got it confirmed. You have a date set up. What next? So you've got your group. You just need to kind of come up with your issues and what your asks are and how you're going to deliver them. So again, review your legislator's background and priorities. Just refamiliarize yourself. Again, like just some examples of things we've learned from doing that. And it's not only on their bio page, right? We ask around, we do other things like that, but it's a progressive progress. We learned with Young Kim's office that her daughter works for the National Park Service, which was really crucial to talk about during the Big Beautiful Bill when they were defunding that agency. We learned that her husband walks every day in the Cleveland National Forest and that she'd prefer he had someone to accompany him. So we've been able to bring multiple folks to go hike with Young Kim's husband and talk about public lands. These are types of things that you'll never find if you don't start to look at these people as humans and try to evaluate their life and kind of the same way we would ours, right? We have family who have jobs who enjoy these places. That's really crucial to keep in mind throughout these. So your meeting's confirmed, you got your background set. Here's the thing that's always tempting, especially with how long it can take to get a congressional meeting. You do not need to kind of, throw everything out there on the table at once. Focus your discussion on 2 to 3 issues, and you can come back. Again, it's an ongoing conversation. You don't want to overwhelm them, but instead leave them with 2 to 3 meaningful topics or asks and delegate those amongst your group so it's not just one person talking. Write down your asks. Things can happen in a congressional meeting where they leave 2 minutes after coming in because they got grabbed out by some emergency. So what I always tell people, have your ask written down. That's your elevator pitch. You can rattle it off in 30 seconds to a minute. And if nothing else could be said that day, you have at least your ask that you can say. And that's come in use a lot of times. I've been at Chamber of Commerce meetings where I see a member of Congress and I see they're, headed to the back door. I can quickly run over there and just look at my quick talking points for my asks, rattle it off, and it was either that or nothing, right? And so it's something that you distill, and we'll talk about that very next. But if you're in a group ahead of time, meet with these folks, especially if you're bringing in folks that aren't part of your coalition, like if they're volunteers or other things like that. You want to make sure they're on the same page. So hold a meeting before, establish what each of you is going to cover or are comfortable with. And as I always tell these folks, you don't need to be a master orator. If folks just want to write down stuff and say it when they're in the meeting, that's fine. It's the member of Congress's job to listen to what you have to say, not how you said it. As long as it's politely, I think you're on the right track. So actually developing your asks. We've gotten to the point now where we want to distill down what we're getting out of this meeting. So your ask, aim for one sentence. You don't need to have a whole, CNN, Fox, NBC analysis ahead of it. This is just again, your elevator pitch. I ask that you fully fund the National Park Service in the upcoming reconciliation. As simple as that. It should be straightforward and something that they can act upon. Then when you have time, right, when you're in the full meeting, support your ask by focusing on why it aligns with their priorities. So if I'm talking to Jay Obernolte, who's very focused on OHV and hunting, I'm not going to be talking up how great of tortoise habitat this area is and how there's 50 endemic species. I'm going to be talking about the 3 legal OHV trails that go through here and how they connect, recreation opportunities. I'm going to talk about how the small businesses right outside of this preserve are benefiting from the fact that this land is protected and open for everybody. And then here's the part, the core, and you should instill this upon the people that you bring into your group. Share your personal experiences. Your narrative is the core of the story. They have staff who can go out and look up every statistic and read through a million different, reports and analysis. But when we're working for Congress, we're looking for anecdotes that can be shared on the Senate or the House floor. Stories that actually move and change people's minds are not statistics. Absolutely, you can follow up with those statistics afterwards, but your story should not be sharing someone else's work or story. It should be sharing your connection to public lands, your business's connection to public lands. Make it your own thing. When I worked for Senator Feinstein, that was always what she asked us was like, go find stories. Like, yes, go find out also, how this is happening, how we can fix it, but find the human impact of it. And that's the realest thing I can offer here is put yourself at the center of the story and whoever else is in the meeting, and it'll come off way more authentic, and it's something that no one else can bring into that door. So keep that in mind through everything you do with engaging with electeds is keep your story at the heart of it. And then where possible, bring supporting documents. One thing I like to do, and we'll talk about this in a second, is actually reference those documents and then share them after because you get to ask for their contact information. You have a reason to follow up with them and restate all of your asks in writing. So just little tactics like that that can help continue your engagement while also giving you more time in the meeting to focus on your story. So I use this in a lot of my meetings, but these are some general tips to keep in mind, and I think they apply no matter what type of elected and what type of meeting you're engaging in. That's be polite to staff and other meeting participants. If you don't pass this bar, everything is for nothing. I can tell you this as having been a staffer for an elected, you get yelled at, you get cursed at, you get all sorts of things all while you are taking home a pretty sad pay. All of this to say they're entry level staff a lot of the time, the folks that you're initially interacting with, even if you really don't agree with what their boss is doing, just remember this is another human being. They're going to listen a lot better if you just talk to them respectfully. And so, I often have to bite my tongue, especially during the worst of things going on. But I've never regretted doing it because if we're here to advocate for public lands, then we should be doing everything that makes us as effective as we can, even if it's biting our tongue and holding back how we really feel sometimes on issues that are not related. So in that same vein, open with a thank you. If you absolutely detest the person, thank them for meeting with you. Thank them for listening to you. Otherwise, go back to that priority list, find something you agree with, and thank them for it. For Mr. Jay Obernolte or Young Kim, I'd thank them for joining the Public Lands Caucus, for example. So just something that you can open with, again, makes it warm, and I guarantee you it'll set you apart from most of the folks that they're meeting with. Take notes. This is crucial. You're not meeting once. You need to know how their stances change over time. There's a lot of adrenaline sometimes going into a congressional meeting, so you want to kind of root it out and make sure you have it all. Make sure your topic is relevant. Don't talk about a state issue to a Fed and vice versa. Here's a crucial one because I know we're running on time. It's always okay to say, I'm not sure. You can follow up. And again, like that tip I said before, gives you another reason to contact the office and let them know and follow up. Always defer to other participants if you get lost. That's why I like bringing 6 people. You can kind of have it be more of a discussion, 3 to 6 people. Always someone to hand it off to if you get stuck there for a moment. And again, keep public lands at the heart of your story. After the meeting, follow up, work towards getting them on the land, work towards an economic roundtable, whatever the goal of your coalition is. But contact should be persistent after the meeting, and you should work towards a goal that works for your campaign. For us, with Representative Calvert, that was an economic roundtable, getting a bunch of businesses, and that culminated in him stating support of Chuckwalla National Monument against its threats. So always happy to take questions or anything like that, and share invites to any of the longer versions of this presentation. But that's it for now. So thank you.
Thanks, Christian. While folks are thinking about questions they may want to ask, I'll ask you one. And let me just invite folks to either raise their hand or drop something in the chat. I'll be watching that. What's the difference between a local elected official and somebody at the federal level? Is there a strategy change that you would make?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on the local level, you kind of have to think of how they're interconnected to everyone as well, right? And oftentimes when we're building out these networks, they are someone that's on the map to also affecting these federal legislators. So I would say one of the key things is to know what their relationship is. Like if it's a city, I want to know what their relationship is with the county, with the local, with the state and the federal electeds, because that'll really kind of influence whether that's someone that I want to target in the first place, right? Out here in the desert, for instance, we approached some of the local city council members and folks like that as a stepping stone to approach the state legislators and then kind of work that way. I would say local folks are focused on local issues, right? And there's a little bit less of a divide between the Republican Democrat when you get to the local level. You're going to hear local control come up all of the time, which is why, for example, you see even pretty leftward folks introduce some bad conservation bills at the state or at the local level. And it's because they are balancing the need for housing, so you need to be really conscious of those things. If I'm going to go approach a local legislator in a city where they're failing on their housing mandate, for example, and talk about, I'm going to be really careful when I talk to them about, housing not being appropriate on public lands. And maybe I'd take more of a wildfire. So you need to look at more local considerations when you're talking with those folks and make sure you have a real good understanding of that landscape, I would say. Otherwise, the engagement itself is pretty similar. With local folks, it's a lot easier to get them involved in community things. So I'd start off with in-person events a lot quicker with my local electeds, getting them out into, either to visit your organization, to go visit a local public land. But I think the general tact that I take with them is largely the same. Just do a little bit more homework because it's a smaller pond, and so your mistakes are, harder to rectify.
Ain't that the truth? Anyone else have any other questions? All right, I see a hand up. Marcia, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for putting all this into an amazing synthesis of what needs to be done. I mean, I know a lot of these things just from experience, but having it all together and helping remind us that we really ought to plan for these meetings and not just go in thinking we're going to have it down because you never know what else might come up. And when you have your goals really clear, I think that that helps. So thank you so much for putting this together.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm glad you got something out of it.
And I would be remiss if I didn't say, or actually, as a geographer, I would not be able to live with myself if I didn't remind folks that if you're talking about public lands, you need to bring a map.
That's a
Uh,
great point.
it gives you context that you otherwise wouldn't be able to share verbally. Gabriella, I see your question in the chat. Are elected leaders required to meet with constituents when they are requested? And then if not, how can we incentivize them to agree to a meeting? Good question.
Yeah, that's an excellent question and a little teeny bit of a gray zone, but I would say broadly, yes. If you are a constituent, then yes, they are required to meet. The member themselves is not required to meet with you. Their office is required to meet with you. And there are no stipulations on how quickly they need to respond to that request or how quickly they will schedule that request, right? So yes, they are requested to, so long here's things for maximizing your success. Bringing multiple people in that have multiple viewpoints because it's multiple orgs and it carries more weight. If they ignore that request, they're ignoring six organizations, right? Not one person. So I like to have multiple people for that reason as well. Make sure that the issue that you are asking about is entirely within their jurisdiction. If I went to a federal, my legislator and said, "Hey, I want to talk about this state bill, but I'm talking to my federal elected," that's not a reason they need to meet with me because it's not their jurisdiction. So make sure that you're just really targeted, have a decent sized group so that you can pull in these different influences. And be persistent. Sometimes you need to ask multiple times. Sometimes you need to ask both their local and state office, or sorry, their local and DC office. But they are required to. And a few other areas they're required to. If you send an email or a letter, they are required to send a response. Can't promise it won't be a form letter they've sent thousands of times, but they are required to send you a response. again, provided you're a constituent, you're being, non-threatening, respectful, all that good stuff.
Gloria.
So again, on the local agency topic, um, I don't know how much experience you have with, say, county supervisors and that type of thing, but
Yeah.
is it important to meet with not only the district supervisor, but the entire board, let's say? What do you think?
Yes. Yeah, so I can tell you, I worked for the CEO's office in Orange County, so I reported to all five supervisors, so a lot of experience there. And I can tell
Okay.
you, let me say something that uh, it comes with as much respect as possible. Local electeds often, there's a tug of war. It's often a stepping stone to something larger, right? So there's a lot of ambition there. If you do offer something for one district, for example, unless it's completely irrelevant, like Orange County, right, the districts make a little bit more sense where you have like certain with just no public lands in them. But as just a gesture of goodwill, I would invite an entire board when I did something like that, just to make sure I'm not causing any kind of stirring anything up. A way that you can always do this is to actually email the CEO and make the invitation through the CEO's office to be a little bit more neutral.
Hmm.
Also through their government affairs department. Example for a city, reach out to the city manager, the town manager. They communicate to all five of them, and that way you don't have you look more impartial that you're not coming at just one elected and kind of ignoring the rest. So I would say that's my normal practice until you get to a little bit more established where it's like, okay, this gentleman's not working at all on this issue, so and has told me as much. I'll leave him off. But those initial encounters, I'd say just brief the whole board if you can.
Okay, so it's not an affront to the district supervisor whose land this is in, let's say. I mean, to
I
do
don't
it
think
that
so.
way.
I think I'd
Okay.
reach out. See, because you have more of that connection of the land is in their district, I think it's fine if you're having one-on-one conversations with that person, certainly,
Yeah.
because it does only apply to them. But let's say
Mhm.
you're taking it to the next stage where the county as a whole has to take an action or the board has to vote. I'd want to
Mhm.
brief the whole board just out of respect.
Okay.
But like for most of your day to day, I think you're fine just engaging with that one person and maybe like every, month, send an update to the CEO and be like, hey, this is how this is going along.
Okay. Great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Good tips there. Any other questions that folks have? If not, I have a surprise question for you, Christian. Is there
Yeah.
anything that you have experienced where the outcome shifted in such a way where you were like, holy cow, that did not land, the way the outcome was in your favor, but you just didn't expect it to go that way, and it was because of your approach to these leaders?
Yes. So I had one in Orange County, actually. I'll share. There's a lot like this, but this is the one that jumps to me most recently. I was doing eco flights. So if folks don't know what those are, you fly basically in a Cessna, you fly over some public lands with a guide kind of sharing what you're seeing, and then attendees, hopefully being electeds and other stakeholders. So I had invited Young Kim's office, Supervisor Don Wagner's office, and a few others. I ended up with a staffer from Supervisor Wagner's office and a couple of journalists. One was for a climate magazine and one was for a outdoors magazine. Supervisor Wagner is one of the more conservative electeds in Orange County, kind of a climate skeptic and a few other things like that. I told his staff right off the bat, like, no pressure for you to talk to the journalists. I'm just here to educate you about the roadless rule, which is what we were talking about. And so we flew over the Cleveland National Forest and kind of right away, I didn't even have to do much of the talking, right? He saw the spot that he camped with his dad for the first time in the Cleveland National Forest. He could see just kind of how close actually the public lands were to where people live and kind of this inspiration of like, oh, I don't want that to get built or not be there anymore. He saw the supposed timber, right? And in an area devastated by wildfires over and over and over, it was clear there was that business connection was now gone. And so, the whole time he was just kind of in awe and had this shocked thing. We landed the plane. The journalists were talking to me, and he came up and they asked him if he'd want to give comments, and he gave a statement on behalf of the county about how appreciative the county is of public lands, and that's why people move here, whether it's the beaches or the mountains, that people want to be near this. And it was a very kind of their version of conservation, right? And he did that completely impromptu. I was not expecting it, having worked with that office for 2 years when I was at the county. So just one of those moments where, again, there's no lost hopes here. There's always a way to kind of move it the right way forward. You just got to put it in their language.
Great. All right, Krystian, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.